Okay. Welcome. There's a function that has not here. I'll got to do this again. Okay. Back we go. Let's see it's working. Yes, it is. All right. Chapter 2, Mizuoka, Subsumption and Marxist Geography, Chapter 2. So this is from, this is just a fragment, but this is the idea. The idea of the book, I think, is a worthy book, and is a worthy task. The sum of the arguments of this book will confirm the statement that social relations and struggles against them, which are concrete abstractions, have no real existence save in and through space. Their underpinning is spatial. And Lefebvre on that. Exposing the spatial underpinnings of power relations and the struggles contesting them is the ultimate task of this book. Now, that, on the one hand, may seem a little on the Kantian side, I suppose, Cartesian side, but it's a little bit more than that. So this chapter examines the logical point of departure and the fundamental material base of Marxist geography, that is physical space. The nature of pristine space, free from human action, is presented in the Euclidean axioms of geometry, summarized in the dual and contradictory attributes of pristine space: absolute space, relative space. The absolute space has contiguousness, homogeneity, and isotropy, and accepts anything as a container. However, relative space has the property of separation differentiation, which individuates anything in space. These two attributes are thus in contradiction, while they are unified in physical space. The dialectics of separation within unity In a class society, the physical space with these attributes is placed under power. 2.1. Space. Come on. Sorry. Damn it. Let's go. Pure space itself, or space in its pristine mode of existence, is not an invention of capitalism, just as the original powers of the land, independent of the actions of human industry, are not. Space in this pristine mode is an antediluvian object in existence since the creation of the universe. Thus, pristine space is older than the emergence of the capitalist mode of production. That's hopefully somewhat obvious. Space of this nature is most close to the concept of absolute space as defined by Harvey as a thing in itself with an existence independent of matter, where structures, people, and land parcels exist in a manner that it is mutually exclusive, each of the other in a three-dimensional physical Euclidean space. This is the space immune to influence in itself and is still the space of the physical world. Three-dimensional geometry would be the most appropriate way to describe this Euclidean space. According to Sachs, space of this nature is what three-dimensional geometry would be the most appropriate way to describe this Euclidean space. According to Sachs, space of this nature is what the physical scientist bequeaths to the geographer and to the social scientist. It is the framework in which their facts and events are located. Now, society can never exist in a one-point world. Space is an integral part of social processes and structures, and thus space must be incorporated as an integral part of the system of Marxist social science. Geographers are well positioned to take up the task of discovering this logic, being in a discipline where the dialectics between society and space have always been a focal point of their research. Discussions and commentaries abound in the contemporary geographical literature, yet few sufficiently dialectical logics have been provided to offer a comprehensive understanding of socio-spatial relations, socio-spatial relations. This does not mean that the one-point world premise is wrong, however. At a higher level of abstraction, it is indeed necessary to abstract space away and construct the theory without space. Yet, at some point in research, the system of Marxist social science must subsume space to rectify and enrich the one-point world premises. Our first task is to identify the initial logical moment unique to Marxist geography that positions it properly and legitimately in the logical process of ascent in Marxist social science. In other words, the crucial category that differentiates Marxist geography from Marxist social science in general. To determine this crucial logical moment, the implications of the word geography must first be examined. Dietrich Bartels, a German geographer, considers the meanings implied in the word geography, pointing out that the word has four different implications. Number one, whatever researcher belonging to an institutionalized social body representing an academic field called geography is doing. Number two, empirical and descriptive field research. Number three, theoretical conceptualization involving space. And number four, the same conceptualization involving the environment or physical world. In this list of definitions involving the environment, the first two are naturally irrelevant. An institution is merely a product of the academic division of labor. Needless to say, often with strife, not a cause of it. Empirical or descriptive fieldwork is a part of geographical research, but also a part of other academic disciplines. Yet, it is a historical legacy that geography deals with the physical environment and space in its specific area of research. The interest of this book does not lie in tracing the evolutionary path of geographical science to prove how geography has come to deal with these two objects as it takes them for granted. Marxist geography, therefore, must demonstrate its uniqueness within the classification of science in the Marxist political economy, in that the spatial concept serves as the crucial and basic element of the theory. This book will, however, not deal with the physical environment, because space and the physical environment are physical substances of a completely different nature from each other, abiding by different laws of motion. Thus, subsumption of physical environment is classified into a different category of science, which is out of the scope of this book. So, subsumption of physical environment is classified into a different category of science, which is out of scope of this book. Now, that's even challengeable, and, even if it is outside of the scope of the book. Anyway, this book presupposes that Marxist geography has its own unique and indispensable theoretical moment, that is, space. The position of Marxist geography should be determined, therefore, by how much space should be placed within the whole system of Marxist social science, and how the uniqueness in its motion is identified. 2.2, the spatiality Marxist geography should assume at outset. As discussed in the introduction, the real contradiction in establishing the most crucial category of Marxist geography lies in the following. We must assume space as the integral element of Marxist geography from the beginning, while also not assuming spatiality at the beginning. Now, what kind of spatiality should Marxist geography assume? Sorry. What kind of spatiality should Marxist geography then assume at the beginning of its ascent? The spatiality that fulfills this condition is only a society with a spatial dimension, but without spatial differentiation. So there's a dimension, but no differentiation. This logical point of ascent can be obtained by abstracting the most basic and pristine element of spatial dimension, that is, distance, out of the diverse reality of the spatial differentiations of the capitalist landscape. As discussed in the previous section, spatial distance, a relation between the one thing and the other, can be expressed in terms of spatial dimension, which has the attribute of distance, but no other spatial differentiation. Here, everything is equalized sub specie spati and distinguished only in terms of distance from one point to another. This is the space at the logical point of departure of Marxist geography. The space at the logical departure may therefore be named pristine space. The only spatial difference comes from the property of physical space itself, as discussed in the previous section. That is, the attribute of expanse and distance, or what incorporates these two attributes, that is, a uniform and homogeneous plane. Pristine space, the point of departure for ascent in Marxist geography, is one of the moments in the theory of the capitalist mode of production obtained through the process of descent, as all capitalism operates over space. Although there's no such empirical existence as a uniform plane, the logical elements that constitute it, namely spatial distance and expanse, do exist everywhere in capitalism. And in this sense, pristine space, or the uniform plane, is the result of the process of descent as opposed to ascent, right? Furthermore, the assumption of pristine space is deeply rooted in the social process of capitalism as one of the real categories expressing the necessary and intrinsic tendencies of the capitalist mode of production. The universalizing tendency of capital, as the Grundrisse describes it, or the tendency toward equalization, Adam Smith. In this general, that may not be Adam Smith, in fact, that may be Neil Smith. In this general tendency of capitalism, the existence of local spatial differences is insignificant as opposed to general tendencies, as the following statement by Marx demonstrates. So, quote, even though the equalization of wages and working hours between one sphere of production and another, or between different capitals invested in the same sphere of production, comes up against all kinds of obstacles, the advance of all economic relations to this point of production tends nevertheless to bring this process to fruition. Important as the study of frictions of this kind for any specialist work on wages, they are still accidental and inessential as far as the general investigation of capitalist production is concerned and can therefore be ignored. In the general analysis of the present kind, it is assumed throughout that actual conditions correspond to their concept, or, and this amounts to the same thing, actual conditions are depicted only insofar as they express their own general type. Capital Volume 3. Close quote. Now, this book attempts to investigate the quote-unquote general type of the logical processes leading to the production of spatial differentiation in the society, especially capitalism. Given this aim, all actual locally different conditions or spatial differences should be abstracted away and assumed as corresponding to the general type. It is from uniformity of category that heterogeneity develops. This is the condition of the problem, as well as the dialectic of introducing fresh categories of Marxist geography. 2.3 is pristine space, the logical point of the departure of Marxist geography. A, introduction. As stated in the previous chapter, geography based on Marxism must be a part of the whole Marxian social science, and it is subject to the unified methodology of ascent and descent. We looked at that yesterday. Recall the cloud of chaos, right? And the ascent and descent. Lefebvre identified the initial basis or foundation of social space. The initial basis or foundation of social space is nature, or natural physical space. Pure space itself, or space in its pristine mode of existence, is not an invention of capitalism, just as original powers of the land, independent of the action of human industry, are not as well. And that comes from, that's described in Theories of Surplus Value, Part 2. Space in this pristine mode is an antediluvian object, which has existed since the creation of the universe. Thus, pristine space is older than the emergence of the capitalist mode of production, which hopefully should be obvious. Physical space came into existence with the Big Bang of the universe and has existed ever since. Everything in the universe is contained in space, and space is a prerequisite for the advent of the biological and human world, if only because all living things, carbon-based life forms, whatever, have a spatial dimension and act across space. And the societies that they organize need some form of physical container that supports their existence and functioning. Now, interestingly, Marx himself describes the dialectical nature of differentiating physical distance in relation to the equalizing pristine space as the container in his work, Theories of Surplus Value, as follows. So, already we see, a certain degree of Cartesianism and Kantianism at work. A dimension of space, quote, a dimension of space, it is a certain length which may as well express the distance of two other things besides those compared. In speaking of the distance of two things, we speak of their difference in space. Thus, we suppose both of them to be contained in space, to be points of space. Thus, we equalize them as being both existences of space, and only after having them equalized subspecie spati, we distinguish them as different points of space. To belong to space is their unity. Now, B, axioms of geometry and the concepts of space. Now, Lefebvre lists the Euclidean geometric space as the first formant for the critical analysis of space. Philosophy treated the Euclidean space as absolute, and hence a space long used as a space of reference, which is what I, that is the author, calls in this book pristine space. The nature of pristine space in the theory of this book is best explained in regard to the property of the Cartesian surface, also called the Cartesian coordinate system, which was first invented in the 17th century by the philosopher René Descartes to show any points on a plane with values shown in x and y axes. The nature of this surface has been more intensively studied and developed as Euclidean plane geometry by mathematicians. Now, the word geometry, comprising of geo, which is land, right, and metry, which is measurement, were derived from quantitative measurements of space, and it thus is closely related to geography. Geometry is a theoretical space of theorems providing the regularity with which various linkages of pristine space occur. Now, the fact that geometry is the centerpiece in the drawing of maps, right, cartography, and the industrial location theory of Alfred Weber supports this close relationship between, now remember this is Alfred Weber, not Max Weber, supports the close relationships between geometry and geography. Now, although the Earth is a sphere and three-dimensional space may become a problem in the case of high-rise buildings, for example, geography approximately deals with a two-dimensional plane where the Euclidean concept of space dominates. Now, this concept starts with the following five axioms, which are treated as self-evident or should be accepted without proof. Number one, a straight line may be drawn between any 2 points. Number two, a terminated straight line may be extended indefinitely, and without getting into issues of parallel and infinity and blah, blah, blah. Three, a circle may be drawn with any given point as its center and with any given radius. Number four, all right angles are equal. Number five, if two straight lines in a plane are met by another line, two straight lines in a plane are met by another line, and if the sum of the internal angles on one side is less than two right angles, then these straight lines will meet if extended sufficiently on the side on which the sum of the angles is less than the two right angles. Now, I know that doesn't sound right, but it is about triangles, right? Geometry treats these axioms as a priori and does not ask for further proofs of them. I mean, we could get into a proof of it, but, hopefully you've already done that in 10th grade or whatever. However, given the fact that geometry is a science that analyzes the system of space, it is obvious that these axioms express the properties of pristine space as an objective existence. Therefore, these axioms are supported by physical substance, even though they have a seemingly a priori expression. Now, next, I consider how these axioms express the property of pristine space for each axiom. The first axiom implies the homogeneity of space in the expression any 2 points and expresses that it's possible to create a position with relative individuality and discrimination in space by setting a point anywhere in the continuous expansion of the space, and that when 2 points are set, a line segment always exists between them, regardless of their positional relationship. This indicates the existence of the distance attribute towards any direction in relation to the original position. That is, the existence of the location and the distance attributes in the space and the isopotry, isotropy of pristine space. The second axiom implies that distance can extend infinitely. That is, pristine space is not limited by any external boundaries or has no boundedness as such and is infinite in any direction. The third axiom states that a circle can be drawn anywhere with an arbitrary radius. That is, the radius r of a circle can exist from infinitesimal to infinity. The function fr equals pi r2, that's the area of the circle equation, is always differentiable. And there is no discontinuity in space that makes this differentiation impossible at any point. R equals infinity shows that the spatial extent is infinite. Additionally, drawing a circle with any given point at its center means bounding by its radius, which means that the extent of a contiguous plane can be bounded by any distance regardless of its relative position. The fourth axiom expresses that any relative relationships existing in this contiguous, pristine space can be compared and reduced to a common measure on a homogeneous basis. In other words, that in pristine space, a common homogeneous property exists everywhere, which enables such comparison. And finally, on that fifth axiom, in the sense that parallel lines can be drawn for any straight line, the first statement of this axiom suggests that the exclusivity in which the parallel lines never intersect, that is, pristine space can accommodate only a unique existence at one and the same position, specifically that pristine space is a Euclidean surface with its curvature being zero. That is, only one bounded piece of space consisting on a set of such line segments is possible in pristine space. And this piece of space occupies a part of the universal spatial extent exclusively. Now, despite these five axioms being disguised as an a priori, the five axioms of geometry, in fact, demonstrate the properties of the Cartesian surface or pristine space as an objective existence. An objective existence. The properties include isotropy, infinity, contiguity, egality, and exclusivity. Now, the pristine physical space is the space immune to influence in itself and is still the space of the physical world. Yet, according to Sack, space of this nature is what the physical scientist bequeaths to the geographer and to the social scientist. It is the framework in which their facts and events are supposed to be located. These properties of pristine space constitute primordial moments which activate when the production of economic and social space enters into the agenda. Let me repeat that. These properties of pristine space constitute primordial moments which activate when the production of economic and social space enters into the agenda. C, Einstein's concept of space. And note that this is, the evolution of spatial, concepts, right? Relative to, non-Euclidean space, etc. Einstein mentioned the nature of space in his foreword to Max Jammer's concepts of space. Well, as to the concept of space, it seems that this was preceded by the psychologically simpler concept of place. Place is, first of all, a small portion of the Earth's surface identified by a name. Place names, right? The thing whose place is being specified is a material object or body, right? The Gulf of America, Simple analysis shows place also to be a group of material objects. Now, does the word place have a meaning independent of this one, or can one assign such a meaning to it? That is, if one is to give a negative answer to this question, then one is led to the view that space or place, as Sun Ra, is a sort of order of material objects and nothing else. Now, if the concept of space is formed and limited in this fashion, then to speak of empty space has no meaning. And because the formation of concepts has always been ruled by instinctive striving for economy, parsimonious, right? One is led quite naturally to reject the concept of empty space. Now, it's also possible, however, to think in a different way. Into a certain box, we can place a definite number of grains of rice or cherries, etc. It is here a question of a property of the material object box, quote unquote, which property must be considered real in the same sense as the box itself, right? This is, Schrodinger's cat, right? One can call this property the space of the box. Now, there may be other boxes in which the sense you could have an equally large, quote unquote, space. This concept, space, thus achieves a meaning which is freed from any connection with a particular material object. Now, in this way, by a natural extension of, quote unquote, box space, one can arrive at the concept of an independent absolute space, unlimited in extent, in which all material objects are contained. Oh, that universe. Then a material object not situated in space, is simply inconceivable. On the other hand, in the framework of this concept, it's quite conceivable. That is, an empty space may exist. Now, these two concepts of space may be contrasted as follows. A, space as a positional quality of the world of material objects. B, space as container of all material objects. In case A, space without material objects. In case A, space without a material object is inconceivable. In case B, a material object can only be conceived as existing in space. Space then appears as a reality which, in a certain sense, is superior to the material world. Both space concepts are free creations of the human imagination, means devised for easier comprehension of our sense experience. These schematic considerations concern the nature of space from the geometric and from the kinematic point of view, respectively. They are, in a sense, reconciled with each other by Descartes' introduction of the coordinate system, although this already presupposes the logically more daring space concept, close quote. Now, let me break here for a second, and you can see that these Cartesian ideas are interesting, important. They have certain manifestations in actual reality, and the entire history of representational stuff is sort of connected to that. One example could be the simultaneous development at around the same time. Let's put it's not concurrent. Let's put it that way. Of Baroque ceilings, the infinite godlike ceilings that that's where God appears, et cetera, and they are developed on a Cartesian coordinate system. The attribute of pristine space A is called relative space, and B, absolute space in this book. To avoid confusion, note that absolute space, defined as such, has a connotation different from absolute space in Lefebvre. Now, we're already confused here, right? This is problematic, and he's trying to sort this out. So, sort of stick with this. According to Lefebvre, absolute space consists of fragments of physical natural space, such as cave, mountaintop, spring river, and the natural space politicized or sanctified is also absolute space. Absolute space in physics, as well as in this book, is far more generic. It derives directly from the very nature of pristine and physical space. So, society needs to take the existence of physical space, for granted. The facts and events of society cannot avoid space of this nature. This is the nature of space that we extract from chaotic reality as the crucial element of Marxist economic geography. So you can sort of see where he's trying to go here, right? With ascent, descent, chaos, whatever, as we saw in the last chapter. 2.4, two attributes of pristine space, absolute space and relative space. Based on the conceptualization of space by Einstein, I now explain the two attributes of pristine space, that is, absolute and relative attributes, in more detail. A, absolute space. The attribute of absolute space was put forward by Sir Isaac Newton, who discovered universal gravitation, is sometimes called the father of physics, as the renowned economist J.M. Keynes, yes, Keynes, pointed out. Newton practiced medieval alchemy. Keynes claimed Newton was not the first of the age of reason. He was the last of the magicians. Newton's spatial theory therefore remained mostly a theological compromise. Newton considered space as the sensorium of God. See, remember what I said about Baroque ceilings. When God gives judgment to anyone after death, in modern terms, it is necessary for each individual to have a database that records their acts in this world. And for that purpose, God installs sensors ubiquitously throughout space. It's necessary to monitor the conduct of all individuals. He knows when you're sleeping, right? He knows when you're awake. It is necessary to monitor the conduct of all individuals and collect and store information about them, because everyone is equal before God. And such a space must have a universal, uniform, and contiguous nature. Newton thus tried to explain the ontology of space through the power of theology. So, problem already. Absolute space is a contiguous and homogeneous spreading, infinitely equal in any direction. So in that sense, it is isotropic as a Cartesian surface. Absolute space is the container of every object, human and thing, including its social and economic processes. Without this quote-unquote container, no object or social relationship can exist. Pristine absolute space accepts everything as it is, creating a physical platform for the substances and subjects in the space to interact through its contiguity, resulting in the homogenization of the materials and subjects contained in absolute space. Suppose that ice at 0 degrees Celsius and boiling water of 100 degrees Celsius with the same mass are placed side by side in a sealed room. In a contiguous space, the hot water and ice exchange heat, the hot water cools down, the ice melts. Eventually, both come to have equal temperatures. Note here, this is a description of how equilibrium operates, right? More specifically, chemical equilibrium. Anyway, the same applies not only to substances, but also to human and social relationships. You see, that move is a really important one. If objects with different properties enter a single container, they interact in the container and come to share the same property. In the same way, absolute space thus has an attribute of equalization in primitive space. Now, B, relative space. The idea of absolute space was considered incompatible with modern natural science, which excludes the supernatural God from every aspect of it. German mathematician Gottfried Leibniz rejected Newton's alchemical spatial concept and established a new space concept. In Leibniz's ontology, space can be interpreted as the relative positional relationship of objects. Now, you can see how this works better for Marx. In his correspondence with Samuel Clarke, one of Newton's agents, Leibniz states, space is nothing else but an order of the existence of things observed as existing together, unquote, while rejecting the Newtonian concept of an infinite empty space, which represents God's immensity. As long as his relative order of existence is established and proven, space is proven. He thereby postulated the attribute of relative space in defining pristine space. On a Cartesian surface, for any value of x or y, it's always possible to define a single unique point, right? X, Y coordinate system. Relative space thereby consists of a myriad of positions corresponding to individual points on such a coordinate plane, and these positions are distinct. A line segment connecting these points defines distances, which physically creates a barrier to the interaction between economic agents and social groups. In pristine space, distance is logically the sole attribute to define spatial differentiation. Distance is the degree of spatial separation between 2 points. The interaction over these points rapidly weakens with a distance decay effect, which is inversely proportional to the square of distance. Now, this relationship is known in physics as the gravity model. Distance creates uniqueness, individuality, and differentiation in the economic system and among social groups. The cost and effort To overcome distance can make the system and groups themselves dysfunctional and thus can jeopardize their very existence, not unlike relationships. 2.5, subsumption of space. The point of departure for the logical ascent of Marxist geography has been thus identified, that is, pristine space with the attributes of absolute and relative. Now, I note that I have only 9 more minutes, and I think we will be going to Adnan Hussein. So I'm going to stop now. We will continue with 2.5 at all, likely on Monday, because we're going to get through the end of the, well, maybe not. We'll continue on in this. So Monday, let me now, in order to get the other thing done, stop this and